And so there is perhaps a need for Western observers to focus a little bit more upon what the Libyan government is actually doing in terms of services and infrastructure and so on, and less on what Muammar al-Gaddafi is wearing. Inevitably, following the sudden collapse of the Ben Ali regime next door in Tunisia and the probably slower, but I would suspect inevitable end to the Mubarak presidency next door in Egypt, people ask how Gaddafi, in power since 1969, can continue to dominate Libyan politics. Now, in some respects, Libya appears to be a very fertile ground for a popular uprising. It has a very youthful population, and you see both mobile phones and satellite dishes nearly everywhere you look. Unemployment is very high. There's all kinds of stories and rumors about corruption. And the only legitimate political participation is in the context of these popular conferences, which constitute Libya's official venue for the exercise of direct democracy. Now, to Americanize this rather elaborate system of popular conferences looks an awful lot like a way to maintain a facade of political activity without having any genuine democracy at work. And it certainly, they don't seem to us always to have any genuine power, the popular conferences. And it's hard not to believe that Muammar al-Gaddafi remains in control behind the scenes, despite his protest that he does not hold any position in the government. The real question is whether what he describes as being the truest form of direct democracy is delivering on its promises. If so, it does not always seem apparent, and Chuck will have a little more to say about that, but it does not always seem apparent in terms of providing better housing, education, medical, and other services to the Libyan people and employing them in useful work. Now, at times, both Muammar al-Gaddafi and ordinary Libyans express scorn for the failures of the government. And as Chuck will describe, I think, Libya's natural wealth provides the means to greatly increase the well-being and productivity of its people. Now, hopefully, Gaddafi will take steps to open up more political space in Libya, along with economic and social progress. But we'll have to say that his initial response to Ben Ali's removal, and now comments he's made on the pressures on President Mubarak, have not been promising. And he has recently met, it's a little difficult to know exactly what happened because there's sort of a media blackout in Libya, but he's recently met, apparently, with a group of Libyan political activists and media representatives, and he warned them of how they might behave during a planned day of rage or announced day of rage by some Libyan opposition website that's to take place a week from today. The Libyan approach of alleviating discontent by providing better services while encouraging wider citizen participation in decision-making, but only in the controlled popular conference venue, remains very untested. And certainly the U.S. cannot prescribe, however, an exclusive blueprint of our own. I come from the District of Columbia, where I have no voting representation at all in the Congress of the United States. But if Libya can make the popular conferences the venue for really meaningful participation, I say fine. Libyans are likely to judge whether this is happening not so much by the frequency of the conferences, but by the outcomes in terms of sounder governance, rule of law, more transparency, clearer lines of access for Libyan people and private companies to officials that have the political power to affect their lives. Those are all big challenges. I would just note in closing that Gaddafi does, as well as not sharing some of the problems of personal image that some of the other leaders have. He doesn't share one other problem that was common to both President Ben Ali and Mubarak, and that was a local perception, not always true, but a local perception that he is, like they supposedly were, a tool of U.S. foreign policy. This is not a problem he has. Moreover, he's not viewed as somebody who necessarily supports the desire of the West for a fully liberalized economic system that allegedly leads to foreign exploitation. So at that point, I'll turn things over to my colleague.
Thank you very much. As always, David's a tough act to follow. I'm very, very fortunate to have David as our honorary chairman, and I have to recommend if anyone ever does decide to travel to Libya, there's no better traveling companion in Libya than David Mack. I also wanted to thank MEI and to also recognize my colleague Haley Cook, who's our program manager at US-Libya and is a fantastic researcher and analyst on all things Libya and Middle East. It might be useful when we talk about the commercial relationship and Libya as a market for U.S. goods to sort of give a bit of a frame of reference. I mean, we've been following Egypt in the news as a country of 80 million people, whereas now we're talking about Libya with roughly 5 to 6.5 million people. And the reason there's a bit of a disparity in trying to find the actual number of Libyans is because Libya is also a destination in the continent of Africa as migration moves north for Africans trying to reach Europe. Libya is often an endpoint to their journey. We're talking about a GDP per capita of around 13,000, which is extremely high in North Africa, a median age of around 24 years, and a literacy rate approaching 87%. The data on poverty levels in Libya sort of varies widely. I mean, if you use the World Bank definition of extreme poverty, Libya's poverty levels are very low. The government itself puts it in their Millennium Challenge goals, reports it at around 12%, but others report it much higher. Unemployment is one of the highest in North Africa, around 20 to 30%. But Libya maintains a capacity to maintain a very vibrant social safety net. In addition to direct payments to the population from their oil wealth, they subsidize housing, food costs, electricity, healthcare. And one of the biggest challenges to maintaining that safety net in Libya is the infrastructure to be able to do that. Not only to improve the physical infrastructure of roads, schools, hospitals, but also, given the vast size of Libya, there are pockets of the population that are in remote areas that are a challenge to address their basic needs. So as a way to do that, Libya has pledged in the next 5 to 10 years $325 billion in public infrastructure spending, which is extremely high. And that ranges, that goes from housing, universities, roads. They're building a railroad, hospital, power generation, water and sewers. So it's a comprehensive rebuilding of the country. As far as exports and goods and services that American companies are investigating in Libya, materials for the oil and energy sector, materials and equipment for the housing and the other infrastructure projects, agricultural products, medical and pharmaceutical equipment, and also the tourism industry in Libya is going from about, I would say, maybe several 100,000 tourists a year to a goal of over 1 million tourists a year by 2015 in Libya. So there's going to be a lot of business opportunities to be able to service that tourism sector.